My fellow Singaporeans, last night, Lee Hsien Loong delivered a National Day rally address that was fit for a third world nation. Not a first world nation, but a third world nation. That address displayed in all its fullest the severe leadership deficit we have in this country today. There was nothing forward-looking about that speech. There was nothing in that speech that would have raised the hopes of you or your next generation that better days are ahead, that you are going to have a brighter future, that your next generation is going to have a better future. He had to trawl into the PAP archives to bring up issues to speak about that are not relevant to the real problems faced by Singaporeans today. Instead, he spoke about racism. And you know, racism is not a problem we have in Singapore. We have always been a multicultural, multiracial society. We have been since 1819, when Raffles founded us. But Lee Hsien Loong and the PAP are using racism as a tool, a defensive mechanism against the growing opposition against his government. And that is most evident. And he alluded to it yesterday in the movement against the SACA Treaty. Now, when People's Voice and I started speaking about SACA a couple of years ago, not many people knew about the intricacies of SACA. People's Voice is the only party that has called for the total abolition of SACA. Because to me, and I will not hesitate to say it, SACA is an evil treaty. SACA is a treaty that has brought grief to so many Singaporean workers and their families. It has displaced so many Singaporean workers and led to lost job opportunities. And now, Lee Hsien Loong says there is a strong racial undertone to SACA, to the SACA movement. No, there is not. Because some of the most ardent supporters of the movement are Singaporean Indians. Yes, let me repeat that again. Some of the strongest opposition to SACA comes from Singaporean Indians. How can that be racist? Our movement, our opposition to SACA is based on the realization that as Singaporean citizens, we must have priority to jobs, and the government must fulfill that promise and enable Singaporeans to enjoy all the resources that the government can master to develop their potential to the fullest. If tomorrow the government were to sign an equivalent treaty, say with another big country like Brazil, we will still oppose that treaty. It is not because we oppose Indians. It is because that treaty is fundamentally wrong for Singapore. Are we then to be labeled as racist against Brazilians? Come on. And you know, this maintenance of racial harmony legislation that he brought up last night, I have no doubt that, like POFMA, it is going to be used very selectively. He brought up a few instances of racist incidents last night. All those, to me, have amazingly appeared after the government started to call opponents of SACA racist, xenophobic, nativists. Well, why doesn't the government investigate other racist claims, like that brought up by Sharanjit Lal, the ex-BBC journalist, who claimed that when she tried to be hired by the local media 2 decades ago, she faced racism. So, my friends, unfortunately, we are going to have to put up with another piece of legislation where it is the ministers themselves who are going to be the adjudicators of what is racism. Let me now move on to another topic that he brought up. He brought up the tudung issue. And I am happy to note that for our Muslim friends, the Muslim ladies will be able to wear the tudung if they are in the nursing profession starting in November. But why only the nursing profession? I know how important it is to the Muslims for the ladies to be able to wear the tudung. It is an expression of their faith. We have seen in many countries, like New Zealand, like England, where Muslim policewomen are able to wear the tudung, designed beautifully. But you know, we have a government that will drag its feet. And if not for opposition members in Parliament who brought this subject up years ago, the government would not have moved. But even when it moves, it is moving at a snail's pace. I say, if you now recognize that it is important to the Muslim lady for them to be able to wear the tudung, let it not only be in the nursing profession, let it be in the police, let it be in other groups that wear uniforms. I do not believe that Singaporeans are so narrow-minded, are so sensitive to think that if a Muslim lady wears the tudung, it is a threat to secularism. That is total rubbish. It also pains me to think that after 32 years or 33 years of the GRC system being in place, we still need the GRC system. They still need to bring up the argument that a minority cannot win an election on his or her own. And to compound to that, in 2016, they even introduced the reserve presidency. Now, all these structures and policies are the ones that have true racial undertones. And it saddens me. It saddens me as a Singaporean to think that my nation today, despite the fact that we have been multicultural and multiracial since the days of Raffles in 1819, we still have to trot this very narrow path. And compare us to other countries. You look at the United Kingdom, you look at Britain, still predominantly very much a white society. But in Rishi Sunak, their current Chancellor of the Exchequer, the equivalent of our Finance Minister, and in Sajid Javid, their Health Minister, who was an ex-Chancellor of the Exchequer, they have two persons of first Indian origin in Rishi Sunak and Pakistani origin in Sajid Javid, who are often touted as future leaders of the Conservative Party. And of course, when you are the leader of the Conservative Party, you are a potential Prime Minister. So why is it that in those countries there is no fear that the minority cannot be elected? In fact, the minority has every chance to be prime minister. And of course, you know very well what is the PAP's argument against an Indian becoming prime minister in Singapore. It has resisted that, right? It has said that our society is not ready for it. So the PAP is great at using racism when it suits itself. But when it has lost the debate, for example, in Seika, it has not only been defeated in the debate, it has been routed comprehensively to the extent that they even have to put up a propaganda video now. And they have to plaster HDB lifts and lobbies with their propaganda. In those situations, they point the finger of racism against their opponents. And finally, let me touch a bit on that part of his address which he said would help the low-wage workers. My friends, do you know that today in Singapore, about 40% of our workforce have a take-home pay of less than $2,400? Now ask yourself, is that the wage of a first world nation? And whatever measures he announced last night, there is nothing to celebrate about. Again, it is foot dragging at its very best. He talked about having a local qualifying wage for companies that employ foreigners. That is now pegged at $1,400. Well, does that mean that if that company employs PRs and not foreigners, it doesn't have to pay the local Singaporean worker the $1,400 as a minimum? So there are loopholes. Look again at the calculations. $1,400, let's say for someone who's 30 years old. You know, after the 20% CPF deduction and a miserable $57 in workfare, his take-home pay comes up to $1,177. You know what an NUS study found a few years ago? That for a senior Singaporean aged 65 and above, if he or she is single, that person needs at least $1,379 to maintain a basic standard of living. And if you are a couple, that figure rises to $2,351 for a couple 65 and above. And for those between the ages of 55 to 64, that figure rises to $1,721. Now you tell me, is the life of that Singaporean going to improve dramatically because of what Lee Hsien Loong announced last night? After the CPF deduction and whatever little he gets from workfare, he is still way short of the $1,379 that is required for a very, very basic lifestyle. So, my friends, there is nothing to celebrate about. And even that little he announced last night would not have come about if the opposition had not pushed and pushed and pushed. For decades now, the opposition have called for minimum wage because that is the way to uplift everyone, every worker in society. But the PAP will not do it. Instead, they want to take this approach, this slowly approach, where, I do not know what he wants to call it, vertical slicing, horizontal slicing. They proceed so slowly, even the cleaners are going to have to wait for another 2 years before they see any rise in their income. And look at another dimension of it. He talks about the anti-discrimination laws. I laughed when I heard him speak about it last night. He says, yes, we are now going to legislate against anti-discrimination. But again, he wants to take the softly approach. There must first be conciliation and mediation before any legal proceedings can be commenced. Now, I'm a lawyer. I have had many clients come to me on labor disputes, and they have had to go through the same process. Conciliation, mediation, before they go to the employment tribunal. And you know how time-consuming it is, and how many people give up at the end of the day because they feel that it is just not worth it. And even when they go to the employment tribunal, there is no guarantee that they're going to get anything substantive. And so, how do you expect a person who feels that he's been discriminated against to adequately present his case to this tribunal or whatever you call it, that he's been discriminated? All right? How many steps and stages do you want him to take to get his proper redress? To me, all these are mechanisms that are not genuine to solve the discrimination against Singaporean workers. It is going to give errant employers all the scope to run rings around the authorities, to run rings around our Singaporean worker. I leave you with that, my friends, and I hope you will reflect on what you heard yesterday and whether that gives you confidence that this is a government that is truly out to improve your lives, or it is a government that is more concerned about preserving the status quo. Thank you very much.